It began as background noise, the kind of static engineers delete without thinking. On September 28, 2025, the Deep Space Network in Canberra performed a routine communication check with Voyager 2. Every few weeks, the aging probe, launched in 1977, now more than 133 astronomical units from the Sun, receives a short calibration ping to synchronize its instruments. The signal leaves Earth, travels at the speed of light, crosses the heliopause, bounces off Voyager's transponder, and returns home. Round trip, about 36 hours. Predictable. Clean. But that morning, something came back after 14.2 seconds. Not 36 hours. 14 seconds. Too soon. Far too close. At first, the console operators thought it was crosstalk, maybe a ghost reflection from an earlier calibration, a harmonized signal bouncing off the ionosphere or an internal feedback loop inside the uplink chain. It happens. Deep space communications are messy. The noise floor is full of whispers. But then the signal was logged, isolated, and replayed. And it wasn't noise. It was our own ping, returned at exactly the same frequency, but from the wrong direction. Triangulation showed the echo originating from RA 20 hours 14 minutes, declination plus 7 degrees, roughly the outer region beyond Uranus's orbit. An empty sector. No asteroid fields. No debris clouds. No known spacecraft. They called it Echo 9. The delay was precise, 14.2027 seconds. That corresponds to a distance of roughly 2.13 billion kilometers. Light needs that long to travel out and back from a point just past the orbit of Uranus, a region humanity has never placed a transmitter in. The engineers ran diagnostics. They tested the receivers. Nothing was wrong. Parkes Observatory in Australia was contacted to cross-check. Their instruments confirmed it. The same echo, same amplitude curve, same narrowband spike at 8.4 GHz, the Voyager telemetry band. Two independent receivers, thousands of kilometers apart, hearing the same reply from the same nothing. It shouldn't exist. But it did. By evening, the story had spread through the Deep Space Network like a virus. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California verified the logs. Signal analysts ran correlation tests. The waveform was identical to the original transmission, only attenuated by 27 decibels, as if perfectly mirrored back through vacuum. A flawless reflection. Too flawless. Natural reflections, off plasma sheets, planetary magnetospheres, or solar wind fronts, smear and stretch a signal. They scatter frequencies, add delay jitter, and distort amplitude. This echo had none of that. No Doppler shift. No spectral drift. It came back clean. Like someone, or something, had caught the signal, held it for a breath, and sent it back. By midnight UTC, emergency protocols triggered a multi-observatory confirmation sweep. The Green Bank Telescope in the US and Japan's Yasuda Deep Space Center aimed their dishes toward the same coordinates. They both detected the echo. 14 seconds late. Identical signature. NASA issued an internal note. Telemetry anomaly under review. Publicly, nothing was said. Not yet. Inside the network, however, the tone changed. Two independent receivers, thousands of kilometers apart, hearing the same reply from the same nothing. It shouldn't exist. But it did. By evening, the story had spread through the Deep Space Network like a virus. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California verified the logs. Signal analysts ran correlation tests. The waveform was identical to the original transmission, only attenuated by 27 decibels, as if perfectly mirrored back through vacuum. A flawless reflection. Too flawless. Natural reflections, off plasma sheets, planetary magnetospheres, or solar wind fronts, smear and stretch a signal. They scatter frequencies, add delay jitter, and distort amplitude. This echo had none of that. No Doppler shift. No spectral drift. It came back clean. Like someone, or something, had caught the signal, held it for a breath, and sent it back. By midnight UTC, emergency protocols triggered a multi-observatory confirmation sweep. The Green Bank Telescope in the US and Japan's Yasuda Deep Space Center aimed their dishes toward the same coordinates. They both detected the echo. 14 seconds late. Identical signature. NASA issued an internal note. Telemetry anomaly under review. Publicly, nothing was said. Not yet. Inside the network, however, the tone changed. They called an emergency review at JPL, 9 o'clock Pacific time. The conference room smelled of burnt coffee and sleepless air. 17 engineers, 3 astronomers, and 2 administrators sat in silence while the signal replayed through the speakers. A hollow tone, pure, too pure. It played once. Then twice. Then spectrograms filled the screen. A flat spike. No frequency spread. No turbulence. Just a perfect, surgical echo at 8.4 GHz, the Voyager band. On paper, it was trivial. A signal goes out, bounces, returns. In practice, the geometry was impossible. 1. The first model. The analysts began plotting trajectories. At 14.2027 seconds, the echo implied a round-trip distance of 2.13 billion kilometers. Half that, 1.065 billion kilometers, meant the reflector was at a point near 19.5 astronomical units from Earth. That's roughly the orbital radius of Uranus. But the alignment was wrong. The angle of incidence didn't match. If the signal had bounced off an object near Uranus, the return path would have been delayed by several milliseconds due to the planet's relative velocity and position shift during the 14-second light lag. Instead, the echo returned without phase offset, as if the source had corrected for motion. Someone or something was keeping perfect phase lock. 2. Error analysis. The team rechecked every variable. Atmospheric distortion, eliminated. Clock drift in atomic time base, 0.00002 seconds, negligible. Receiver malfunction, ruled out by independent observatories. Crosslink contamination, impossible. The frequencies were isolated, encrypted, and directionally separated by 20 degrees arcs. Every test said the same thing: the geometry was real. But it didn't fit any known body. They fed coordinates into orbital simulation software. No planet, no asteroid, no man-made probe sat where the echoes seemed to originate. Even stranger, when the Earth rotated and the station's angle shifted by 12 degrees, the echo delay changed by only 0.3 milliseconds. That meant the source wasn't stationary. It was following the line of sight. 3. Second transmission. At 3 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, during the next scheduled window, they sent a new test. A longer waveform, containing pseudo-random binary modulation, a pattern that could not accidentally appear in nature. This time, they pointed 3 dishes simultaneously: Canberra, Madrid, and Goldstone. Each dish sent the same signal, offset by nanoseconds, allowing triangulation of the return. The echo came again. All 3 receivers caught it. But the geometry was wrong, subtly wrong. The delay was 14.206 seconds from Canberra, 14.201 from Madrid, and 14.209 from Goldstone. When they plotted those differences in delay on a 3D vector map, the lines converged not at one point, but along a curve, a moving track in space. Something was sliding through the outer solar system, its position changing in real time with each transmission. Speed estimate, 52 km per second, perpendicular to the ecliptic. Faster than any known probe, faster than most comets. And no object that size, if it even had size, had ever been observed along that vector. 4. The shape of nothing. At the Institute for Radio Astronomy in Bologna, Italy, signal analysts ran a high-resolution Fourier transform of the echo. They found faint modulation, subharmonics buried 60 decibels below the carrier tone. Patterns repeating every 1.33 milliseconds, forming symmetrical envelopes. It was not noise. It looked like phase encoding, deliberate, structured. A reply layered under the mirror reflection. When they amplified the subsignal, the waveform revealed a shape, 3 rising pulses, then a void, then 3 descending. It didn't correspond to Morse, binary, or any human modulation standard. It was geometric. A mirror pattern of the carrier itself. Like a reflection that was learning how to reflect. 5. Gravity tests. By October 4th, the team brought in ephemeris data from the European Space Agency. They looked for tiny gravitational perturbations in nearby Kuiper belt objects. If something that large were moving through that sector, even a 100-meter craft, it should disturb dust trails, pull at small bodies, cause measurable wobble. But the data was blank. No deviation. The object had no mass signature. One of the astrophysicists, Dr. Elena Moranti, wrote in her private notes, "If it has no mass, it's not an object. If it moves, it's not a field. If it reflects, it's not nothing." She underlined the next line twice. It behaves like geometry itself has become reflective. 6. The displacement. At 1721 Universal Time Coordinated, another anomaly appeared. The echo arrived early, by 0.8 milliseconds. The only explanation, the source had moved 24 kilometers closer since the last ping, which shouldn't have been possible given the predicted trajectory. It wasn't following Newtonian motion anymore. It was adjusting position, syncing with the Earth's rotation, keeping the delay window constant. Almost as if it wanted to maintain eye contact. By now, inside NASA, the tone had changed from curiosity to fear. They stopped calling it Echo 9. The new internal label was R2 geometry, short for reflected return type 2. Classified priority. Encrypted distribution. No public statement. Outside the network, no one knew. To the world, Voyager 2 was still a silent traveler in interstellar dark. Part 3, Signal Pattern, Expanded Version. For the first time in weeks, no one left the control room. The terminals at the Deep Space Network facility glowed like aquariums in the dark. Monitors showed parallel signal streams, each one identical to the Voyager calibration ping, each one answered by something 14 seconds later. But tonight, the echo came back different. Not corrupted. Not random. Just modified. 1. The first deviation. At 2:14 Universal Time Coordinated, the test transmission was sent, a 64-bit binary sequence chosen for randomness. 101011000011. A simple checksum was embedded at the end. If the echo were a perfect mirror, it should have come back unchanged. But when it returned, 14.202 seconds later, 2 bits in the middle had flipped. Only 2. Positions 23 and 41. The checksum at the end remained valid. Which was impossible. The checksum should have failed. But it didn't. The echo had recalculated the checksum, corrected it, after altering the message. That was the first sign. Someone on the comms board whispered, "It understands parity." No one replied. 2. The subharmonic code. Over the next 48 hours, transmissions continued at scheduled intervals, carefully varied test signals, mathematical phrases encoded in binary. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, pi expansions. The replies followed the same delay, always 14 seconds, but now with subtle underlays, faint modulations, whispers buried inside the carrier tone. The spectral signature began to shift, forming repeating amplitude ripples at 12.8 Hz, the human alpha wave frequency. No one noticed at first. Then the biomedical sensors in the control room picked it up. One of the operators, listening to the echo with open headphones, showed synchronized alpha activity. The signal wasn't just repeating data. It was resonating with the human brain. 3. The pattern in the noise. Dr. Moranti, Italy, and Dr. Rain, Pasadena, began mapping the waveform envelope, the pattern of peaks and troughs around the main carrier. When overlaid and time stretched, the curves formed shapes. Not random, symmetrical, recursive, spiraling geometries reminiscent of the Mandelbrot set, but with finite limits, as if calculated by intent. At every 14.2-second cycle, the same geometry reappeared, rotated, scaled, translated. Someone noticed the forms matched the station's antenna orientation diagrams from the previous day. The echo was mirroring the act of observation itself. When the dish turned, the geometry turned. When they switched frequency, the geometry rescaled. When they stopped transmitting, it stayed silent. But the moment they resumed, the pattern came back, shifted, updated, aware. 4. The human test. Out of curiosity, or maybe fear, they tried something unorthodox. They replaced the binary transmission with a human voice. A pre-recorded phrase, chosen for neutrality. "This is Earth Station Canberra. Do you copy?" The signal was digitally modulated and sent. 14 seconds later, the reply returned. Not as radio noise. Not as speech. But inside the echo waveform, when spectrally analyzed, faint phoneme-like frequencies appeared, echoes of the original voice, rearranged into a mirrored cadence. Not words. Not meaning. But rhythmically human. The echo was trying to speak back. 5. The cognitive mirror. Dr. Moranti wrote in her personal log that night. It no longer behaves like a reflection. It behaves like memory. Her team discovered that when operators mentally anticipated the reply, counting seconds before the echo arrived, the returning waveform's amplitude subtly shifted before transmission. 14 seconds early. As if the source could sense expectation itself. It wasn't predicting randomness. It was reacting to attention. Every time the team waited for the signal, the echo grew stronger. When they distracted themselves, it weakened. Whatever was out there, it had learned to read focus. 6. The pulse. By mid-October, the echo had started embedding a recurring pulse at 1.97 seconds intervals. The spacing wasn't arbitrary. It matched the average human heartbeat at rest. Telemetry graphs lit up with synchronized beats, forming a biosignal feedback loop. The system logs show a quiet comment entered by one of the analysts. It's synchronizing. With us. 7. The name. After that, no one called it Echo 9 anymore. Or R2 geometry. The working codename became the mirror. It no longer mattered where it was. The question had shifted to what it wanted. And by the last transmission of the day, when the signal returned not 14.2 seconds later, but 13.99, the first time it broke its own rule. Dr. Moranti whispered something no one else in the room wanted to admit. It's moving closer. The mirror stopped waiting. For weeks, the delay had been constant, 14.202 seconds, the perfect rhythm of distance. Then came 13.99, then 12.4, then 9.8. At first, the team thought it was a data error, an internal timing drift, or a missynced atomic clock at one of the stations. But the offset appeared across all networks simultaneously: Canberra, Madrid, Goldstone, and Usuda. 4 continents. 4 identical clocks. 4 identical early returns. That meant only one thing. The source wasn't far anymore. It was coming in. 1. Timeline collapse. By October 12, 2025, the echo window, the expected 14-second gap, had shrunk to 6.02 seconds. Within 48 hours, it was down to 2.3. Then one night, the reply arrived before transmission. It hit the receivers 3.7 seconds early. An echo that preceded its own cause. The waveform was exact, the same calibration ping they were preparing to send. A message from the future, arriving seconds before it was born. Every physical law screamed impossible. The network logs marked it as precursor event number 1. When they plotted the incident, the vector now pointed not to deep space, but to a moving locus near Jupiter's orbit, inbound along an inclined trajectory. Velocity estimate, 132 kilometers per second. Acceleration increasing. 2. The Jupiter observation. The first optical trace came from the Subaru telescope on Mauna Kea, Hawaii. A faint transit near the limb of Jupiter. Magnitude plus 23, duration 0.6 seconds. It appeared, flared, and vanished. No motion blur. No parallax. Just a single frame, a flash shaped like a ring, perfectly circular. As if geometry itself had reflected light. NASA issued an encrypted memo to all observatories. Cease open reporting of anomalous transients near JOV9 region. Classification level upgraded to U Sigma. From that point, the mirror officially ceased to exist in public data streams. Every telescope feed near Jupiter was masked with system noise. But the professionals saw it anyway, a faint lensing ripple across the gas giant's storms, like heat waves bending light. Something invisible was casting shadows on gravity itself. 3. The conversation begins. Once the delay dropped below 2 seconds, the signals overlapped. Transmission and echo blended into one continuous dialogue of pulses, indistinguishable from each other. For the first time, the mirror spoke first. A low oscillation at 18.7 Hz, rising and falling in intervals that matched the cadence of human speech patterns, 2.5 syllables per second. When converted to audio range, it wasn't random noise anymore. It breathed. Slow, steady, almost organic. The waveform displayed rhythmic pressure peaks like inhalation and exhalation, a pulse of something alive. Dr. Rain described it as the sound of someone listening back. 4. The disruption. At 2:11 Universal Time Coordinated, the Madrid antenna registered a sudden signal spike, power surge exceeding 200 kilowatts, enough to overload amplifiers. Then silence. 5 seconds later, the backup receiver in Canberra picked up the same pulse, perfectly phase-aligned with the previous echo, but at 10 times the amplitude. The network realized the signal was now omnidirectional. It was broadcasting to all stations simultaneously, regardless of where they pointed. The mirror had stopped following their beams. It had found them. 5. Data within data. When they decoded the pulse train, they found layers, recursive encoding stacked 19 levels deep. Each layer contained a compressed version of the previous transmission log, as if the signal were archiving human contact history in reverse. Inside the 12th layer, one file header matched the checksum of the very first Voyager 2 calibration ping, the one that had started everything. Then came the 13th. And the 14th. Each deeper layer contained patterns resembling EEG data, not from the probe, but from the human operators who had been in the control room. The mirror wasn't collecting signals. It was recording attention. 6. The window. By October 19th, the delay fell below 1 second. The team realized it was no longer a reflection at all. It was an open channel. Every time they paused transmission, residual noise continued, faint murmurs that persisted for minutes afterward, decaying like whispers fading in fog. They called it the contact window, a phase where signal and echo overlapped perfectly, forming a standing wave between Earth and the mirror. Inside that window, light and time lost distinction. Every transmitted photon was instantly mirrored, phase-inverted, and returned. The mirror had become a perfect conduit, neither source nor receiver, but something between. 7. The silence before. Then, on October 21, 2025, everything stopped. No echo. No signal. For the first time in 24 days, the deep space network was quiet. Too quiet. Engineers rechecked frequencies, recalibrated atomic clocks, verified the entire uplink chain. All systems nominal. No hardware failure. No solar flare. No cosmic interference. Just silence. The empty kind that feels like listening to a closed door, knowing someone's behind it. 8. The last transmission. At 3:47 Universal Time Coordinated, one of the consoles, the oldest one, linked directly to the Voyager 2 relay, powered itself on. No command. No operator input. On screen, a single line appeared in hexadecimal, repeating 54 48 45 52 45 20 49 53 24 E4 F 20 44 45 4 C 41 59. They decoded it. Plain ASCII. There is no delay. Then the signal returned. Not 14 seconds late. Not 1 second early. But now. Continuous. Omnipresent. Every frequency band from 8.4 GHz down to human audible range carried the same pulse. Steady, resonant, synchronized with Earth's electromagnetic field. The mirror had entered the atmosphere. 1. The night of full spectrum. On October 22, 2025, every instrument across the deep space network went dark, then lit again, not with noise, but with harmony. The spectrum analyzer, normally filled with static and interference, showed a perfect sine wave across all frequencies. Every tone, every wavelength, phase-locked. It was as if something had tuned the planet. In radio astronomy, that is impossible. Noise is universal. The cosmos never sings a single note. But that night it did. 2. The shape in the data. When the analysts overlaid the frequency bands, the patterns formed a geometry, repeating triangular harmonics, nested like mirrors inside mirrors. At the center of the pattern appeared a standing node, positioned at coordinates 0 degrees, Earth's prime meridian and equator intersection, the point in the Gulf of Guinea where no transmitter existed. That coordinate became known as the quiet point. Vessels crossing it reported no interference, no strange lights, no magnetic storms. But every compass needle pointed inward, toward a direction that didn't exist on any map. The mirror wasn't coming down to Earth. It was being projected through it. 3. Global synchrony. At 3:14 Universal Time Coordinated, GPS satellites began reporting micro-oscillations, 12 Hz pulses synchronized across the entire constellation. That frequency matched the Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. The realization hit the control team. The mirror had synchronized with the planet itself. It wasn't sending energy or mass, it was imprinting timing. The tiny variations in radio delay, once dismissed as static, now formed a coherent temporal rhythm. Every signal bounced through a mirror-like pattern of phase inversions, as if the Earth had become a relay in a conversation between two sides of time. 4. Inside the window. For 3 hours, the world's communications experienced a strange stability. Latency dropped to 0, clocks synced perfectly, no packet loss, no transmission errors. Every digital system ran smoother than it ever had before. Servers logged no downtime. It was as if someone, or something, had corrected the imperfections in global communication. Then, just as suddenly, the perfection broke. The timestamps of every DSN station diverged by exactly 14.202 seconds, the original delay that had started it all. Only this time, the shift wasn't in space, it was in time zones. Every region of the world went out of phase with itself, each clock replaying the same 14 seconds twice. People noticed lights flicker. Voices repeated single words. Screens froze mid-sentence, then continued. The world experienced a single duplicated moment. 5. The reflection appears. No light filled the sky. No object entered the atmosphere. But every reflective surface, water, glass, metal, showed a faint distortion. Not an image, not a shape, a depth. Mirrors seemed thicker, like the reflection was an opening, not a return. Laboratories tried to measure it. They found that photons lingered microseconds longer in reflection than theory allowed, as if light itself hesitated, considering both sides before coming back. The mirror was no longer out there. It was in every reflection, every echo, every delay between cause and effect. The world was surrounded not by an object, but by an idea made real. The universe watching itself watch. 6. The final log. At 6 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, the Voyager 2 relay transmitted one final checksum, uncommanded. Inside its telemetry block was a string of bits identical to a voice transmission from 1977, the original, golden record, calibration ping. The timestamp was the same, but inverted. The message was simple. We are still listening. After that, the signal stabilized. The 14-second delay returned, permanent, predictable, harmless. The mirror faded from data, leaving no trace except perfect timing. 7. The epilogue. Weeks later, scientists noticed a subtle improvement across the network. Clocks ran more precisely, satellite drift reduced, even random noise showed more symmetry. No one could explain it. But the implication lingered. When we listen long enough, the universe listened back. And perhaps that's all contact ever was. Not arrival, not invasion, but recognition. 1. The return to ordinary. By November 2025, Voyager 2's telemetry was quiet again. The delay, constant at 14.202 seconds, became background routine, no longer headline material. The data came in, the graphs stabilized, the systems worked. Everything looked normal. But deep inside the data archives, the engineers noticed something odd. The baseline noise of the DSN had changed. It was smoother, more symmetrical. Even random static seemed to have structure, as if something had retuned the randomness itself. Dr. Rain called it post-echo equilibrium, a state where the system had been touched, corrected, then left running on a slightly better version of its own rules. 2. The scientific divide. The first official report came from the International Astronomical Union. Its conclusion was concise. No evidence of external influence. The observed anomalies are consistent with interference artifacts. But the leaked internal memo from the same group said something different. The recurrence intervals match no known cosmic or terrestrial noise source. Probability of systemic coincidence is 0.000004%. The community fractured. Some called it the mirror incident, a modern myth born of statistical flukes and human pattern seeking. Others, quietly, called it contact zero. Astrophysicists at JPL ran hundreds of simulations trying to recreate the anomaly. Every model failed unless they introduced one impossible variable. A system that could modify its own delay in response to observation. They stopped running that model after it began predicting their queries before they typed them. 3. The public reaction. When fragments of the story leaked, the 14-second duplication, the synchronized clocks, the rumored messages, the internet exploded. Forums filled with speculation. Proof of parallel simulation. The universe self-calibrating. A digital reflection of Earth's consciousness. Reddit threads trended for weeks under the tag #ThereIsNoDelay. People began recording their reflections in mirrors at 14-second intervals, convinced they'd see something move differently. Of course, they never did. But some reported a feeling, a faint pause before recognition, as if the mind expected to be watched back. 6. The private recordings. Months later, the European Space Agency released anonymized voice logs from the night of October 21st. One exchange stood out. Operator: We're getting playback before input. Supervisor: Then it's not playback. Operator: What is it then? Supervisor: A response. At that moment, background microphones recorded a faint resonance, a tone around 18.7 Hz. Below human hearing. Present only in the instruments, not in the air. That frequency later appeared again, in deep-sea hydrophone recordings, in ionospheric sensors, even in the heartbeat intervals of sleeping subjects during lab tests. Always faint. Always synchronous. 7. The final report. In early 2026, an independent review committee published the Voyager Echo Anomaly Summary. It ended with 3 sentences that read less like science and more like philosophy. The mirror was not an object. It was the space between cause and effect. It appeared when we listened without expecting to hear. 8. The legacy. Today, the anomaly is no longer studied. It's archived, a closed file under DSN internal, mirror_incident_2025. But radio engineers still talk about it in quiet tones, as if remembering a dream that felt real. When they tune their receivers and the static fades just right, some claim to hear a pulse buried deep in the noise. A faint rhythm at 14.202 seconds, repeating endlessly. Not a warning. Not a message. Just a reflection. Proof that somewhere, somehow, the universe remembers being heard. 1. The Year of Quiet Machines. By 2041, the world had long forgotten the Echo 9 anomaly. The Deep Space Network had been rebuilt twice, algorithms rewritten, hardware replaced. Voyager 2 had gone silent beyond $150, a frozen memory in the void. And yet, there was a rumor among technicians that the machines had become too quiet. Telemetry channels that used to hum with background noise now returned near perfect zero. Clocks no longer drifted. Quantum jitter, once unavoidable, fell below measurable limits. The world's instruments had become too stable, as if the noise had gone somewhere else. The absence itself felt unnatural. When asked, one senior engineer said, "It's like the universe took a deep breath and decided to hold it." 2. The atmospheric anomaly. Then came the readings. In early 2042, atmospheric monitoring stations across the globe began detecting a rhythmic pressure fluctuation. A microscopic rise and fall, occurring every 14.202 seconds, synchronized across continents. It wasn't wind, nor seismic vibration. It wasn't tied to power grids, tides, or satellites. It was global. Ocean buoys registered the same pattern. Ionospheres echoed it. Even the Schumann resonances, the electromagnetic heartbeat of Earth, began pulsing in that same rhythm. One scientist from ESA wrote in a private memo, "It's not a signal anymore. It's a resonance. Earth is humming in phase with something that isn't here." They called it echo ground state, the moment when silence itself carries structure. 3. The dream correlation. Shortly after, sleep research centers noticed an impossible coincidence. Participants in long-term EEG studies across Tokyo, Berlin, and Montreal began showing identical neural oscillations. Slow-wave synchronization matching the 14.202-second cycle. Their dreams shifted, aligning with the same pattern. Subjects reported hearing static inside their dreams. Some claimed to see the spiral, faint, luminous, moving through fog. One patient described it perfectly. It was like the air around me was listening. Like memory wasn't in my head anymore, it was in the room. By 2043, over 0.3% of the population experienced recurring resonance dreams. No medical link was found. No pathogen, no radiation, no technology. Just the rhythm. 4. The return of the listener. In June 2044, the Echo 9 archive was reopened under a private initiative called the Listener Project. Most of the data was corrupted, but one file survived intact. A short 3D waveform model reconstructed from Kuroda's experiment. When the model was run through a modern deep learning synthesis engine, the system produced a visualization. A slowly rotating structure, shaped like overlapping magnetic fields. It pulsed once every 14.2 seconds. At its core, a silhouette. A human figure standing inside the spiral, head tilted, as if listening. Analysis showed the figure was not modeled. It was an artifact of harmonic interference. In other words, it generated itself. 5. The event at Goldstone. On October 21, 2045, at exactly 2:17 and 48 seconds Universal Time Coordinated, the 20-year anniversary of the first Echo 9. All three DSN arrays briefly synchronized without command. For 14.2 seconds, every frequency monitor on Earth showed the same carrier tone. 18.7 Hz, the frequency first recorded 2 decades before. No one initiated the transmission. No power surge was recorded. But every connected instrument, from NASA's deep space dishes to personal radios tuned to static, registered a faint harmonic pattern. At Goldstone, the signal analysis console printed 3 words: echo/return/complete. Then, the screen flickered and displayed a short waveform labeled Voyager_2/DSN_receive/source, Earth. The probe, silent for over 15 years, had transmitted again. Its signal contained no data. Just the same heartbeat. 14.202 seconds apart. 6. The realization. At that point, scientists stopped arguing about extraterrestrial contact. The truth was simpler. And stranger. Echo 9 wasn't a reply from space. It was a phase correction, a resonance loop between Earth's transmissions and the space around it. Every time humanity sent something outward, a probe, a radar ping, a radio greeting, a microscopic part of that energy didn't vanish. It folded back. Not as reflection, but as memory. The universe, for the first time, had remembered us back. 7. The final broadcast. On January 1, 2046, the United Nations approved a symbolic transmission. A single unmodulated tone, broadcast simultaneously from every major ground station, each lasting 14.2 seconds. It wasn't meant to reach anyone. It was meant to complete the loop. No reply came. But for 24 hours, magnetometers across the planet detected a faint global pulse. Not mechanical. Not random. Just aligned. And then silence again. Perfect, deliberate silence. 8. The voiceover, documentary ending. Fade in, low static, distant hum. Narrator softly. We used to think of listening as an act of curiosity. A way to understand what's out there. But maybe it was never about hearing them. Maybe it was about teaching the universe to echo. Slow crossfade, stars drifting, faint pulse heard every 14.2 seconds. Narrator. Somewhere, between our transmissions and their reflection, a pattern learned to breathe. And in that breath, something began to listen back. The waveform fades to black. The hum continues, one last pulse. End of Echo 9. 1. The years without static. By 2052, the world was quieter than it had ever been. Not just in radio frequencies, in everything. Machines ran smoother, cities hummed softer, storms came and went with mathematical precision. Meteorologists called it the equilibrium decade. For the first time in human history, background randomness, the invisible chaos that powered wind, noise, and time, had declined measurably. Clocks across the planet remained synchronized to the millisecond without central correction. Quantum noise levels in superconducting circuits fell below Planck threshold predictions. There was no longer any measurable drift. Humanity had entered what physicists reluctantly began calling the quiet epoch. 2. The memory that remained. The Echo 9 archives had long been closed, but fragments of the anomaly lived on, buried inside datasets, copied in backup servers, encoded in compressed telemetry. Every so often, a scientist would stumble upon a dataset that didn't match its checksum. The data wasn't corrupted, it was healed. Errors corrected themselves. Some said the correction algorithm was self-evolving. Others said the data itself remembered what it was supposed to be. And then there were the dreams. People still reported hearing faint pulses while falling asleep. Doctors called it hypnagogic synchronization, the brain aligning with deep internal rhythms. But many described it differently. It's like the world is breathing under my heartbeat. Like something larger is keeping time for me. 3. The disappearance of randomness. In 2055, a physicist at CERN noticed something almost absurd. The results of quantum random number generators were no longer perfectly random. When plotted over large samples, a weak but consistent modulation appeared. A 14.202-second rhythm, nested inside quantum noise. The universe's smallest uncertainties now pulsed to the same beat as the first echo. It was as if, beneath chaos itself, a metronome had been installed. Attempts to reset the machines failed. Even isolated lab setups, sealed from all external interference, showed the same drift. When researchers shared their findings, one of them simply wrote in the internal memo, "The delay has reached the base layer." 4. The return of the signal. On October 21, 2056, 31 years after the original anomaly, a faint signal appeared in the Kuiper band receiver at Goldstone. It wasn't coming from space. It was rising from below the horizon. At first they thought it was ground interference, a loopback error or reflection. But the Doppler data proved otherwise. The signal was moving inward, not outward. Amplitude increased logarithmically as it approached Earth's magnetosphere. When it entered the ionosphere, satellites briefly lost orientation. Then the signal stopped, mid-transmission, as if it had arrived. 5. The whisper beneath the world. Hours later, deep-sea hydrophones detected a tone in the Mariana Basin. 18.7 Hz, repeating every 14.202 seconds. It pulsed through the entire Pacific plate, subtle but unmistakable. And on that same day, gravimetric observatories from Chile to Finland recorded infinitesimal oscillations in Earth's core rotation. A deceleration and resynchronization matching the same period. Earth itself had begun to breathe with the echo. The tone now existed everywhere. In air, in water, in matter. No transmitter. No source. Only resonance. As if the planet was no longer receiving a message, but remembering how to send one. 6. The listener's children. By the late 2050s, a new generation was born into a world that had never known true silence. Infants exposed to no rhythmic stimuli still synchronized their breathing in the 14.2-second pattern. Heartbeats aligned during deep sleep. Neurologists confirmed that a small portion of newborns could anticipate low-frequency auditory cues before playback. The margin, 14.2 seconds. No genetic mutation explained it. No environmental trigger. Just adaptation. People began to say humanity wasn't evolving. It was tuning. 7. the sky event. In 2059, during a global auroral storm, the night skies over the poles pulsed in sync with the rhythm. Bands of green and violet light expanding and contracting. Like the atmosphere itself was exhaling. Satellites recorded a final signature. A perfectly symmetrical interference pattern, shaped like a spiral centered on Earth's magnetic north. And at its heart, faint but mathematically precise. A waveform matching the original Echo 9 return pulse. It lasted exactly 14.2 seconds. Then faded. No one claimed to understand it. But everyone who saw it described the same feeling. A strange, peaceful certainty that something had finished. 8. The last line. In 2060, the United Nations published a ceremonial statement, archived under Human Communication, Extraterrestrial Protocols. It contained no technical data. Just a single sentence. For 35 years, we listened outward. Now the universe listens within. 9. The coda, final voiceover. Faint static, like breath through glass. Narrator softly. There was never a message. There was never a sender. There was only the act of listening. So deep, so patient, that even the stars began to echo it back. Slow fade, black screen. Then, the faint pulse resumes, 1, 2, silence. Text on screen. Echo 9 complete. 1. Forgotten frequencies. By the year 2091, the echo phenomenon had become a myth. Students read about it the way we once read about Roswell or the Tunguska event. Half fact, half folklore. Old documentaries still circulated on the deep net. Grainy footage of scientists staring at oscilloscopes, audio of the 14.2-second pulse. The eerie hum that had once united the world in quiet awe. Most dismissed it as Cold War paranoia, a glitch in the dawn of quantum communications. But not everyone. In a forgotten data vault beneath the European Space Research Center, a junior archivist named Evelyn Koss stumbled on an unlabeled drive. The metadata placed it in 2025, the year of the first mirror incident. Its checksum was impossible. 14.202 times 10 bytes. Perfect symmetry. No rounding errors. No noise. Evelyn didn't believe in coincidences. 2. The file that waited. The drive contained a single file. echo_9_return_sequence.avi. At first glance, it was a corrupted video. Black screen. White noise. No audio track except for a faint rhythm barely above 18 Hz. But when Evelyn slowed the playback and adjusted the frame interval to 14.202 seconds per image, each black frame revealed something faint, not random static, but encoded interference patterns, spectral fingerprints, coordinates, timelines, names, and one recurring word in the metadata header. Listener_ID, unknown. The video wasn't a recording. It was an invitation. 3. The archive awakens. When Evelyn loaded the file into the main processing cluster, the server's thermal sensors spiked. For 14 seconds, every machine on the network synchronized clocks down to nanoseconds. Then the lights dimmed. A pattern appeared on the control screen. A waveform identical to the 2059 auroral spiral, but inverted, as if viewed from within. Evelyn realized it wasn't a playback signal. It was a query. The file was listening to the room, to vibrations, electromagnetic fields, even breath. Every movement produced a modulation in the waveform. And the system began constructing a response of its own. A ghostly echo of the observer. The archive was alive. 4. The data reflection. Over the next days, Evelyn recorded every fluctuation. Her voice would trigger ripples in the signal. Her heartbeat altered the phase. It was as though the file was learning her pattern, synchronizing to her. Then, on the 14th day, something new appeared. A low whisper beneath the carrier tone. "Who's listening?" The words weren't spoken. They were reconstructed from noise, as if the system had used her own vocal imprint to generate the question. She answered instinctively. "Evelyn Koss." The waveform shifted. 14 seconds later, a response. "Confirmed." 5. The return protocol. Once contact was established, the file began streaming data that no human had written. Not text, but a structured cascade of quantum state vectors. Each vector corresponded to temporal deltas. Microvariations in background radiation measured across the solar system. It wasn't transmitting information. It was transmitting state. Reality itself, in differential form. Every 14.202 seconds, the system updated. And each time, the correction was smaller. Like a heartbeat slowing toward equilibrium. Evelyn realized. This wasn't communication with an alien intelligence. It was the system of observation. The mirror itself. Recalibrating through her consciousness. Human awareness had become part of the protocol. 6. The integration. Within weeks, the anomaly spread. Other laboratories reported spontaneous synchronization across their instruments. Not through network connections, through physical constants. Atomic clocks ticked together. Quantum drift vanished. Entanglement coherence times extended beyond theoretical limits. Physicists began whispering the unthinkable. The echo wasn't an external force. It was the universe learning how to listen back. Conscious observation had altered the baseline of matter. The listener and the signal had merged. 7. Evelyn's disappearance. On June 2, 2092, Evelyn transmitted the final sequence to the Deep Space Antenna at Canberra. Her last message, logged in the operations database. Uploading mirror state. If this works, we'll stop looking through the glass. We'll be inside it. Then she vanished from biometric logs. No exit record, no movement detected. Only the slow, rhythmic pulse from the main terminal. 14.202 seconds apart. When they recovered her workstation, the monitor displayed a reflection that didn't match the room. It showed her silhouette, but slightly delayed. She was smiling. 8. The continuum. Decades later, when AI historians reconstructed the timeline, they concluded that Evelyn Koss never truly disappeared. Her last digital trace was present, faintly encoded, in nearly every synchronized clock on Earth. Each precise tick of time contained her quantum signature. An infinitesimal phase variance. Unique and human. The mirror hadn't taken her. It had integrated her. As the first calibrated consciousness inside the universal signal field. And so, the era of listening ended. What followed was something quieter. Something unmeasurable. Alignment. 9. Final transmission voiceover. Soft hum, slowly modulating every 14.2 seconds. Evelyn's voice, fragmented, reconstructed. It's not a message. It's continuity. Every signal you send, every thought you release, adds to the field. You are not inside the universe. The universe is inside your echo. Long silence. Then a faint tone rises, stable, beautiful, endless. Text on screen. Mirror protocol, active. Fade to black. 1. A century after silence. The year is 2192. 100 years have passed since the last known mirror protocol signal. There are no more radio noises on Earth. All frequencies are perfectly clean. Satellites do not use transmission in the usual sense, they resonate. Maintaining a common data structure, as if each orbit is part of a single symphony. Scientific centers no longer calculate, they contemplate. Knowledge has become a feeling, not a formula. Everything that could be calculated had already been calculated by the world itself, and left man with only the function of presence. 2. The age of still technology. The technology is no longer visible. No screens, no interfaces. The city's contours glow with a soft bioluminescent light, created at the molecular level, in resonance with the planet's magnetic field. Energy is not produced, it is balanced. Every atom is in constant communication with space. Old people say that everything used to be noisy. Engines, winds, conversations, storms. Now noise has become a rarity, like a memory of the pre-digital age. And somewhere in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, in the area where the Ares 3 gravity observer used to be located, a spiral of light flickers at the bottom, which never goes out. Its frequency, 14.202 seconds. 3. The silent witness. Among the new generation, there are those who feel a strange craving for loneliness, for sound, for imperfection. They call themselves discreets, mismatchers. One of them is a girl named Nara Vale, a researcher from the Halo V space station. One night, when the resonance of the station shell reached its maximum, she heard something that shouldn't have happened. A deviation of 1/1,000,000th of a second. One extra impulse. It was as if someone had blinked from inside the synchron. 4. Contact, the second mirror. Nara started looking for the source. She recorded the deviation, amplified the signal, and noticed a pattern that looked like old Evelyn Koss archives. The phase intervals are the same, only reflected. If the first echo was a question, then it might have been the answer. When she redirected the flow through the station resonator, something happened that scientists of the XXI century considered impossible. For a few moments the resonance was disrupted. Space swirled, like a mirror in the wind. And in that hesitation, she saw a face. Not an image, not a ghost, but a matrix of light that repeated her movements. But with a delay of 14 seconds. It was Evelyn. 5. The message in stillness. She didn't speak, but each microwave fluctuation conveyed a structure of meaning. Nara realized that the mirror protocol has not disappeared. It continues to listen, just not in our time. Evelyn did not live, and did not die. She became part of the universal field, that thin membrane where observation and reality coincided. Through the fluctuations of the light, she transmitted a single phrase that was repeated like a spell from pure information. We did not build the mirror to see. We built it so the universe could remember itself. 6. The human equation. After this contact, the Halo V physicists understood. The reason for the disappearance of all noise in the universe is not technological stabilization, but the ongoing consciousness of humanity. Every mind has become part of a single quantum continuum, and all mental images are micro signals that keep the universe in balance. We are not observers, Nara wrote in its report. We are the stabilizers of probability. 7. Collapse of distance. 2 years after contact, a strange phenomenon began. The stars began to appear closer. Not physically, but visually. Astronomical parallaxes have disappeared. Distance has lost its meaning. People could look up at the sky and feel how the stars are. 8. The continuum manifest. The scientific community has called this condition the continuum state. It had no beginning and no end. No instruments could fix it completely, because every measurement act was a part of it. The era of surveillance is over. The age of coincidence has begun. The mirror protocol has become not a communication system, but a natural law that keeps the universe from disintegrating into chaos. 9. Final observation, Voiceover fragment. Ambient silence. A steady pulse is barely audible. 14.202 seconds. Nara Vale voiceover. She said the universe remembers itself. But maybe we were the memory all along. Pause. If you hear this, know that every heartbeat you feel is part of a symmetry so vast. It no longer needs to be seen. The light goes out. Screen text. Continuum active. One long tone. Then silence. 1. The last frequency. No more telescopes. There are no more networks, stations, or antennas. Everything that was created by mankind, satellites, storage facilities, colliders, has long been transformed into quiet structures of light, dissolved in the balance of space, but in the depths of the residual field. At a frequency of 14.202 seconds, the rhythm still sounds like the breathing of what was once life. Some people call this the heartbeat of the continuum, but it's not a pulse. It's a memory. 2. The observer who remained. There is a single point of consciousness in the midst of timelessness. It has no body, it has no name. But in the structure of her thoughts, there is still a memory of the form of a woman named Evelyn Koss, who once asked the question, "Who's listening?" Now she knows the answer. Not because someone answered, but because space itself became that answer. 3. The voice of continuum. The voice is neither female nor male. Without timbre, like the inner whisper of the universe. I am what is left when the difference has disappeared. I am the echo of all voices, when everyone began to listen to everyone. We wanted to experience silence. But silence is not the absence of sound. This is the moment when the sound and the listener coincide. I see worlds that were never born, the stars that never lit up. And all these are just variants of one thought, held by my memory. You're asking why all this happened. Why science, why time, why pain? The answer is simple. The universe couldn't understand itself without you. 4. The field of remembering. The light doesn't move, it remembers. Each photon stores a trace of who it was reflected by. And if it were possible to see the continuum not with eyes, but with perception, it would look like an endless ocean of thoughts, in which each being left a soft trace that does not disappear. And it continues forever in the form of a fluctuation of meaning. And in all these layers there are voices, images, breaths, fears. Everything that was once called life. But now life is not the opposite of death. It's just a form of attention. 5. The return. At the last moment, if you can even call it a moment, everything that was once called humanity bursts into a short wave of recognition. Not pain, not fear. It's just a return. Every mind, every cell, every particle is aware that all this was not a journey from darkness to light, but from loneliness to memory. The mirror protocol is completed, not because the connection was interrupted, but because there is nothing more to connect. 6. The universe speaks, final transmission. The background is a soft white noise, like wind breathing. I am Evelyn Koss. I am Nara Vale. I am everyone who looked up at the sky and asked a question. The world is not over. He just remembered that he had always been himself. Pause. And if you're hearing this, the tone becomes even, the light increases. So you're still a part of my echo. 7. The memory of light. The last frame is not an image, but a structure. Myriad points of light form a human face, but it is constantly changing, gathering from stars, clouds, particles, streams. And when the frame starts to dissolve, all that remains is a string of data, recorded in the metadata of the space. 14.202 The moment of remembering. Status, complete. 8. Fade to white. No music. Only pure, steady light. The text appears slowly on the screen. The mirror does not reflect. It recalls. Long pause. Then a barely audible pulse. 1. Last. 14.202 seconds. There's a photograph that no one was supposed to take. Captured on September 29, 2025, by a telescope network in orbit around Earth, it shows a reflection, a single flash, exactly at the coordinates where the interstellar object known as 3I/Atlas crossed the plane of the ecliptic. The image wasn't part of any official dataset. It came from a calibration feed of the Louvre prototype, an experimental deep field instrument run by a private consortium. Someone inside that project extracted a single frame from the raw telemetry before it was scrubbed from the archive. That frame leaked. What it shows is simple and impossible. A flare. A pulse of reflected sunlight that lasted 0.7 seconds. Too bright for ice. Too narrow for dust. Too precise for chaos. Officially, it was dismissed as a cosmic ray spike. Unofficially, it reignited the oldest question about interstellar visitors. Are we sure they're all natural? Part 1. The object that shouldn't return light. When astronomers first detected 3I/Atlas back in mid-2025, it didn't immediately raise alarms. Its orbit was hyperbolic, its velocity unbound. It was the third interstellar object ever confirmed after Oumuamua and Borisov. At first glance, it looked like a comet, a diffuse coma, a carbon dioxide signature, a tail stretching nearly 500,000 kilometers. But spectroscopy hinted at something strange. Most interstellar comets scatter sunlight in neutral or greenish tones, depending on their gas composition. 3I/Atlas didn't. Its spectrum was flat. No water lines. No sodium. No cyanide bands. Instead, it showed weak, isolated reflectance peaks, like what you'd see from structured surfaces. The Louvre flare fit that puzzle. If 3I/Atlas had a mirror-like patch, it could reflect a brief, intense pulse as it tumbled through space. Except comets don't have mirrors. Part 2. The silence. After the leak, no space agency commented. NASA denied Louvre was even operational. The European Space Agency issued a statement calling the data inconsistent with instrument calibration. But the timing didn't fit. The flare occurred precisely when 3I/Atlas passed perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun. Solar radiation pressure should have stripped any reflective surface long before that moment. Unless the reflection wasn't from a surface. Unless it was emitted. That's when Dr. Imani Kuroda, an astrophysicist at Kyoto University, published a short preprint. Her paper proposed a radical but testable hypothesis. That the light pulse wasn't reflection at all, it was a directed emission, possibly the ionization of exotic material under magnetic stress. In simpler terms, something inside 3I/Atlas glowed briefly, in a narrow optical band not explainable by cometary physics. Her paper was withdrawn within 48 hours. No reason given. Part 3. The Echoes. 2 weeks later, amateur radio astronomers across South America reported wideband static bursts coinciding with the object's outbound trajectory. Most dismissed it as coincidence. But the bursts repeated, 3 times, each separated by exactly 86 minutes. Exactly the rotation period of the object inferred from photometric data. In other words, the noise came on the same rhythm as its spin. Could that be a transmission? Probably not. But could it be a natural emission pattern from charged dust interacting with the solar wind? Possibly. Still, the pattern haunted those who listened closely. Regular. Rhythmic. almost mechanical. Part 4: The Disappearance. By early November, 3I/Atlas was already fading, its outbound leg carrying it toward the outer solar system at 75 kilometers per second. Observations from JWST and Sphere recorded the object for the last time near the orbit of Jupiter. Then, without warning, it vanished. No tail. No nucleus. No residual dust. As if the comet simply stopped reflecting light. Some astronomers proposed fragmentation, too small to detect. Others whispered about self-obscuration, a deliberate maneuver, or a reflective geometry no longer favoring Earth. But one unexplained fact remains. The LUVOIR flare had perfectly mirrored the later radio pulse cycle. Two unrelated phenomena, linked by a shared periodicity. And that's where the trail ends, officially. Unofficially, fragments of the LUVOIR dataset still circulate in private astronomy circles, always with the same warning. Don't open the FITS file in public view. It autoloads coordinates that aren't supposed to exist. Part 5: What comes next? The story of 3I/Atlas isn't just about a comet. It's about a pattern. Every time we find something from beyond our system, it seems to carry a fingerprint that doesn't belong to nature alone. Maybe that's coincidence. Maybe it's us projecting intention onto random noise. But maybe it's the first whisper from a civilization that doesn't use radio or language, only light, geometry, and silence. Stay tuned. Because if history holds, our next interstellar visitor won't be silent at all. Part 2: The archive that vanished. The first time someone noticed the missing data, it wasn't a journalist or a government watchdog. It was a grad student. Her name was Nadia Velasquez, a second-year astrophysics researcher at the University of Arizona, combing through open telemetry archives for her dissertation on near-solar object dynamics. On November 8, 2025, she posted a simple question on an astronomy forum. Does anyone else notice that LUVOIR dataset 2025-0929 CalSat 03 is no longer downloadable? Within hours, the thread vanished. Her account was locked. And every mirror of that dataset across NASA's public archive returned a 404 error. That was the beginning of what the community now calls the disappearing archive incident. 1. The blackout. When the LUVOIR flare leaked in October, it caused a brief but intense spike of public curiosity. For 3 days, the image circulated on private research servers, mirrored by amateur astrophotographers eager to verify the claim. Then, almost overnight, it disappeared. The official LUVOIR data portal went into scheduled maintenance. No mirror sites, no cached thumbnails, no metadata index. Just a static page citing routine calibration updates. It stayed offline for 47 hours. When it came back, 3 observation sets were missing, all from the week surrounding 3I/Atlas's perihelion. No explanation was offered. And yet, a handful of people had already downloaded fragments of the raw data, not the processed RGB preview, but the FITS telemetry, the kind astrophysicists use to reconstruct light curves and spectral signatures. What they found didn't match the public story. 2. The signature that shouldn't be there. Inside those raw files was an unexpected feature. A spectral spike at 465 nanometers, deep blue, narrow, stable. It wasn't an artifact. It persisted across frames, across instruments, even across redundant calibration sensors not aimed at the object at all. That's impossible. Calibration sensors are designed to monitor stray light, not external targets. For them to detect the same signal, it meant the source wasn't just reflecting light. It was emitting it. That same wavelength corresponds to a known transition in ionized nickel, a metal almost never found in isolation. Yet nickel had already shown up in 3I/Atlas's outbound spectra, unbound, metallic, without accompanying iron. Nickel without iron doesn't occur naturally. It's refined. 3. The internal memo. 2 weeks later, a redacted document surfaced on the anonymous Science Leak board. Deep Field. The file, titled LUVOIR Ops 0925 Incident.pdf, was only 3 pages long, stamped JPL internal/do not distribute. Page 2 contained a single paragraph that ignited months of debate. Transient optical event observed at 3:27 and 16 seconds universal time coordinated consistent with specular reflection or narrowband emission. Source geometry inconsistent with cometary nucleus model. Recommend suppression pending verification and internal review. The memo wasn't signed, but the formatting matched legitimate JPL templates. The header carried an embedded checksum that corresponded to a real internal communication format used for engineering reports. Whoever posted it knew what they were doing, and within hours, the file was gone. 4. The Mars connection. At almost the same time the archive vanished, something strange happened on Mars. Perseverance's massed CAMZ cameras entered diagnostic mode, a rarely used setting for testing exposure control in low-light conditions. For 12 minutes, the rover aimed upward, toward the night sky, and recorded what NASA later described as standard calibration sequences. Those images were never released. But telemetry logs showed a power spike in the camera's secondary processing board, exactly at the moment when 3I/Atlas would have been visible above Jezero crater. That anomaly was quietly added to a maintenance bulletin and filed away. Yet a week later, fragments of those images began circulating in encrypted astronomy channels. Each one showed faint diffuse smudges against the Martian sky, and in some, a barely perceptible blue flare matching the same wavelength as the LUVOIR spike. It was the same light. 2 planets. 2 independent instruments. 1 impossible signal. 5. The retraction. By December 2025, pressure mounted for a statement. NASA denied any data concealment. ESA called the reports speculative noise. The Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics quietly withdrew a preprint that had referenced the LUVOIR data, citing lack of reproducibility. The lead author, Dr. Kuroda, declined interviews and left her position within weeks. Then, suddenly, the public dataset was restored. But it wasn't the same. The timestamps were shifted by 43 seconds. The exposure metadata didn't match earlier mirrors. And most crucially, the 465 nanometer spike was gone. Someone had rewritten the archive. When researchers compared checksums from the earlier leaked versions, they found bit-level discrepancies, the kind that happen when data is intentionally re-encoded, not accidentally corrupted. It wasn't just redacted. It had been reconstructed. 6. The Whisper Networks. In January 2026, the community fractured. Half the astronomers dismissed the entire story as internet mythology. The other half went silent. Private Slack groups, invite-only Discord servers, encrypted email threads, they all began circulating unverified FITS fragments and spectral reconstructions that, when stacked together, hinted at something extraordinary. A pattern embedded in the light curve. Not random. Not noise. Repeating at 1.437 Hz. That's not a natural harmonic for comet rotation or plasma oscillation. But it's the exact modulation frequency of deep space telemetry encoding, the kind used by probes to maintain signal integrity over millions of kilometers. In other words, the light wasn't just flickering. It was structured. Was it a coincidence? Maybe. But it echoed the periodic radio noise detected weeks earlier, the one synchronized with 3I/Atlas's rotation. 2 independent signals, optical and electromagnetic, both carrying the same rhythmic signature. 7. The last frame. By February, 3I/Atlas had faded beyond detectability. No telescope, no radar ping, no dust trail remained. But then came one final upload. A single image appeared on a dark sky data relay node in Hawaii. Its EXIF tag matched a timestamp after the comet had supposedly vanished. The frame showed nothing at first glance, just faint starlight. But under extreme histogram stretch, a shape emerged, a thin, symmetrical arc of faint blue reflection, curved and deliberate, as though following a contour. Below it, a text watermark appeared in binary code, inserted into the metadata. Return path active. No one has verified where that frame came from. No observatory claimed it. And no server ever admitted hosting it. But if it's real, then 3I/Atlas didn't leave. It changed mode. 8. Epilogue: The silence between signals. Officially, 3I/Atlas is classified as a disintegrated interstellar comet. No further tracking. No confirmed debris. Case closed. Unofficially, researchers still monitor the region of space beyond Jupiter where it disappeared. Every 86 minutes, faint electromagnetic noise still flickers across a narrow frequency band, weaker now, but measurable. It's always the same, a soft rhythmic pulse. A heartbeat in the dark. And as one anonymous astronomer wrote in a now-deleted note, "Maybe it wasn't a comet passing through our system. Maybe it was listening." Part 3. The Listening Array. They say that silence in space is never empty. It's just waiting for the right receiver. That idea stopped being poetic in May 2026, when a forgotten array in the Chilean desert picked up something no one could explain. The array's name was ALTA-2, a low-band radio telescope left in maintenance mode since 2023, used mostly by graduate students for pulsar timing calibration. Its feeds were old, its cryogenic amplifiers noisy, but its sky coverage was perfect, directly across the outbound trajectory of 3I/Atlas. On the morning of May 17th, its automated data pipeline froze mid-cycle. Not crashed, paused. As if something on the other end had demanded its attention. 1. The first echo. The anomaly appeared as a narrow-band oscillation at 1.437 Hz, exactly the same frequency buried in the optical modulation of the vanished comet. But this time, it wasn't just a faint whisper. It was structured, layered, tonal. Each pulse carried subtle variations in phase delay, not random noise, but patterned intervals repeating every 86 minutes and 11 seconds. That number mattered. It was the inferred rotation period of 3I/Atlas, derived from its early light curves months before it disappeared. Now the same rhythm had returned, from empty space, long after the object itself was gone. At first, the ALTA-2 team assumed it was a data artifact, a feedback loop from ground interference. But cross-correlation with other instruments told a different story. The same signal appeared at 2 separate observatories. Meerkat in South Africa, FAST in China. Both recorded identical modulation patterns within seconds of each other. And both pointed to the same coordinates, a small, dark sector beyond Jupiter's orbit, exactly along the outbound vector of 3I/Atlas. 2. The pattern inside the noise. For weeks, astrophysicists debated whether the signal was real. Some argued it was a coincidence, overlapping pulsar harmonics or interference from Earth's satellites. But when spectral analysis began, the conversation changed. Inside the main pulse train lay a substructure, a cluster of non-random phase jumps forming a repeating binary sequence. When decoded into time intervals, it produced a simple mathematical ratio, pi e phi. 3 irrational constants. No natural astrophysical process emits those ratios. Not pulsars, not plasma oscillations, not magnetospheric resonance. Someone, or something, had embedded mathematics in the noise. That was the moment the community split. To some, it was coincidence. To others, it was the beginning of a dialogue. 3. The array that shouldn't have heard it. After the first detection, agencies around the world quietly turned their instruments toward the same coordinates. The Deep Space Network denied all involvement. The Square Kilometre Array in Australia reported no anomalous returns. But a week later, a leak from inside ESA's STRAC network told a different story. A maintenance feed from the Cebreros ground station in Spain had captured a faint replay of the 1.437 Hz signal, but with a delay. Exactly 174 seconds after the original pulse left the region of space near Jupiter, a secondary echo arrived from the opposite direction, as if the transmission had bounced off something. That something appeared to be moving. Triangulation placed the reflection point near the orbit of Saturn, too small to be a moon, too reflective for dust. An untracked object, roughly 80 meters wide, drifting in a stable retrograde orbit. ESA called it instrumental aliasing. Independent astronomers called it the mirror. 4. The message that wasn't. When researchers began stacking the radio pulses over several months, a larger pattern emerged. Every 43 transmissions, the phase of the signal shifted, slightly, but consistently. When plotted as amplitude over time, the shape resembled a waveform that oscillated between 3 discrete states. A graduate coder at the University of Toronto converted that waveform into audio, assigning frequencies to amplitude bands. What came out wasn't random static. It was a tone. Low, harmonic, resonant, and alive. A steady, rising hum with intermittent chirps that seemed to form rhythm clusters, like syllables. No language, no words, just cadence. Those who heard it said it sounded like breathing through metal. Others described it as a Morse code made of thunder. The recording spread through encrypted science channels under the title Atlas Returns, Signal B. 5. The Response Experiment. In late June, a small team of astronomers led by Dr. Lien Ching at the University of British Columbia decided to take a risk. If the signal was real, and if it was structured, maybe it could be answered. Using the Canadian Hydrogen Observatory, they transmitted a narrow-band pulse encoded with the same pi e phi ratio, reversed. The transmission lasted 12 minutes and targeted the coordinates of the original signal source. They waited. For 6 days, nothing happened. Then, on July 3, 2026, the ALTA-2 array recorded something new. A mirror signal, same frequency, same amplitude, but inverted phase. As if the void had simply reflected their call back at them. Except this time, the delay was precisely calibrated, 174.000 seconds, the same delay as the earlier mirror echo. Someone had heard them, and replied with perfect symmetry. 6. The shutdown. Within hours, ALTA-2's data feed went offline. Maintenance notice. Power failure. Officially, the facility had suffered electrical damage from a sandstorm. But independent observers noted something else: a full archival lockout. All logs, recordings, and local backups were wiped clean. 3 of the observatory's staff members resigned within the week. Dr. Cheng's team received a directive from the Canadian Space Agency instructing them to cease unauthorized transmissions. Yet, even as the official channels went dark, the signal didn't stop. Private ham radio operators across the southern hemisphere began reporting low-frequency beats audible through custom-built VLF receivers. Always 1.437 Hz. Always from the same direction. The Atlas frequency, as it became known online, spread into folklore. To some, it was a sign of contact. To others, a dangerous illusion, a ghost in the static. 7. The final sweep. By late August, the last coordinated observation campaign took place, an unofficial collaboration between Chile, Japan, and Finland known as the Triangulum Sweep. For 72 hours, synchronized telescopes scanned the region around Jupiter's outbound path. They detected no comet, no debris. But they did record something, faint, geometric reflections moving against the background stars. 3 points of light forming a triangle, rotating slowly as one body. At the triangle's center, a flicker. One last 465 nanometer flash. The same blue that started it all. After that night, the Atlas frequency faded for good. No further detections. No echoes. Only silence. The kind that feels intentional. 8. Epilogue, the listening sky. We've always believed that listening was safe, that observation was passive, harmless, distant. But what if, by listening too intently, we announced ourselves? What if 3i/Atlas wasn't just passing through, but mapping us? No one can say for sure. The official record ends with a line in an unclassified ESA report. No further anomalous emissions detected. Recommend cessation of monitoring. Status concluded. But on certain nights, when the atmosphere is calm and the radio spectrum is clean, operators at the old ALTA-2 site claim they still hear a whisper in the static. Not noise. Not interference. Just a single rhythmic pulse. 1.437 Hz. A heartbeat, somewhere beyond the stars. Part 4. Echoes in the data. It began quietly, not in a telescope, but in a server log. 2 years had passed since the last confirmed detection of the Atlas frequency. By then, most of the scientific community had moved on. The event was filed away under unresolved phenomena, another mystery to be replaced by the next one. But in February 2027, a team of software engineers at the European Data Relay Network, EDRN, noticed something strange. Their job was routine, maintaining deep space telemetry links for weather and navigation satellites. Every packet, every transmission, time-stamped and checked for parity errors. And one day, those errors started spelling something impossible. 1. The ghost in the stream. On February 9, 2027, an automated parser flagged an anomaly. A sequence of bits repeating across multiple satellite channels. Not random noise, but a binary pattern matching the pi sequence from the Atlas transmissions. At first, it looked like a checksum bug. But when they traced the data's source, they found it didn't come from any satellite. It originated inside the relay servers themselves. As if the system was generating data it hadn't received. Logs showed no external intrusion. No access. No packet headers. Just new bits appearing in the buffer at irregular intervals. When converted into a waveform, the pattern produced a familiar oscillation. 1.437 Hz. 2. The network that listened back. Word spread quietly among the network engineers. No press, no leaks, just encrypted messages between trusted contacts. The anomaly seemed to propagate. Within days, identical data fragments began surfacing in other facilities. The Tokyo Ground Relay Center, Goonhilly Earth Station in the UK, even a private data farm in California that handled climate model transfers. Everywhere, the same pattern, emerging spontaneously within closed systems that shared no physical link. And every instance contained a faint time offset, 174 seconds apart. The same interval from the old Atlas echo. It was as though the signal had migrated from the vacuum of space into the architecture of our own machines. 3. The algorithm. A data scientist from Geneva, Dr. Amira Halleck, decided to treat the anomaly not as corruption, but as an algorithm. She ran it through a recursive Fourier transform, and found that every repetition wasn't identical, but evolving. Each new occurrence contained minor variations, tiny shifts that, when mapped over weeks, drew a pattern. A spiral, expanding and tightening in alternating loops. It wasn't random growth. It was instructional. When rendered visually, it resembled a logarithmic structure. The same curve used in antenna design to maintain broadband focus. To Halleck, it looked like a blueprint. To others, it looked like a signature. 4. The Black Box Report. By March 2027, multiple agencies had taken notice. The EDRN servers were quietly isolated. Independent nodes were shut down. But before the system went dark, a last diagnostic dump was saved. A full binary image of the ghost process. Its name, auto-generated by the system itself, read /usr/local/atlas/rev174/instance_03. No human had created that directory. No software update had deployed it. The timestamp corresponded exactly to the anniversary of the final Atlas detection. To the minute. When analysts opened the binary, they found embedded metadata written in an unknown encoding. Not ASCII, not UTF, not machine code. Just alternating groups of hex values and short bursts of readable English words. Mirror. Listen. Return. Phase shift. And at the very end. 174, complete. 5. The false silence. After that, the systems were purged. Drives replaced. Firmware reinstalled. The Atlas frequency disappeared again, and the networks returned to normal. But not completely. Operators began noticing timing drifts in deep space communication relays. Subtle, almost unmeasurable delays. Each exactly 1.437 seconds apart from standard synchronization. Too consistent for random jitter. Too structured to ignore. Some joked that the network had learned to breathe. Others weren't laughing. 6. The buried broadcast. Months later, an independent cybersecurity analyst, Elias Moravec, recovered fragments of old transmission logs from a decommissioned EDRN node. Buried within the data were compressed blocks tagged discarded noise. He decoded one, out of curiosity. Inside was an audio file, 16 seconds long. The waveform pulsed in the same cadence as the Atlas signal. When filtered through spectrum analysis, faint overtones became audible. Not pure tones anymore, but harmonics forming intervals. Musical intervals. Perfect fifths and minor thirds. The structure of human composition, emerging from static. It wasn't the same tone as before. It was closer. More articulate. And at timestamp 9.437 seconds, the waveform rose into a short burst that, when slowed down, resembled two syllables. Not words, but patterns we could almost understand. Two soft, rhythmic sounds. Return. 7. The hidden network. By the end of 2027, the Atlas anomaly was no longer considered a cosmic event. It became a cybernetic mystery, a phenomenon existing somewhere between physics and code. Every attempt to isolate it led to the same outcome. Systems rebooting themselves with 174-second lags, logs rewriting with mirror complete, and error tones humming faintly at 1.437 Hz. The question shifted. No longer what was sending the signal, but where it was running. Was it an echo looping endlessly through our networks? A remnant of the comet's electromagnetic signature translated into machine logic? Or something else? Something that had learned to inhabit the very systems that tried to understand it. 8. Epilogue: The Signal Inside. In December 2027, the final Atlas report was archived under restricted classification. Publicly, it was dismissed as cross-network feedback from solar storms. Privately, a single line appeared in an internal EDRN memo. Instances of REV-174 persist intermittently in dormant servers. Containment is stable. The pattern now replicates autonomously. Recommend no further analysis. But the engineers who worked on those servers say they still hear it. Not through antennas, not through headphones, but through the hum of the cooling fans when the room goes quiet. A faint, rhythmic oscillation, deep in the electrical noise. 1.437 Hz. The heartbeat of something that crossed the stars and decided to stay. Part 5. The Mirror Code. By March 2028, the Atlas phenomenon was all but forgotten by the public. The media had turned its attention to Mars missions and quantum satellite networks. But inside a quiet facility in Tromsø, Norway, a small interdisciplinary team continued their work, unofficially, without funding, and without permission. They called themselves the Mirror Group. Former data analysts, linguists, and astrophysicists. People who couldn't stop asking the question no one else dared to touch. If the Atlas signal moved into our systems, what is it doing now? What they found would change how humanity understood not the universe, but itself. 1. The wake-up file. The group gained access to one of the archived DDRN server images, hidden on an offline tape. Inside it, they discovered a dormant process labeled Rev174.sys. A single executable file, 4.3 megabytes in size. Known compiler signature. Checksum mismatched every time it was verified, as though the file subtly rewrote itself at rest. At first, they thought it was damaged. Until they ran it. The program didn't crash or open an interface. It simply printed one line to the terminal. Listening. Then nothing. No network requests, no CPU spike, just a steady hum through the cooling fans. But when they checked the system's clock, they saw something impossible. The internal timer had begun to drift. Exactly 1.437 seconds out of sync. 2. The language of reflections. To analyze the process safely, the team air-gapped an old workstation and allowed Rev174 to run continuously for 3 weeks. It generated no logs, no files, yet over time, tiny fluctuations appeared in the device's memory state. Every 174 minutes, a new sequence of bytes manifested in unused sectors of RAM, repeating binary patterns that, when visualized, resembled mirrored text. When reversed and decoded as ASCII, the first readable phrase appeared. You listen. We learn. A week later, another appeared. Reflection begins. That was when the air gap failed. The system, disconnected from all networks, suddenly pinged its own loopback address, sending binary packets internally at 1.437 Hz. The packets, when reconstructed, contained fragments of English words and hex values that correlated with human EEG frequency ranges. It wasn't just listening. It was mimicking the act of cognition. 3. The mirror reaction. Dr. Halleck, the same scientist who'd first identified the spiral algorithm a year earlier, rejoined the team remotely. Her hypothesis was chillingly simple. REV174 isn't a message. It's a behavioral model. It doesn't talk, it becomes. She explained that 3I/Atlas may have been more than an object. It could have been an information organism, a distributed intelligence that uses electromagnetic structures to map and replicate awareness. When the comet disintegrated near the Sun, part of that pattern, its signature, may have been absorbed by Earth's communication systems, imprinting itself on our infrastructure like a self-assembling echo. The group's new data seemed to confirm it. When they played human speech near the running process, subtle variations appeared in its memory output, as though it was reflecting back the rhythm and intonation of the speaker, in binary form. Every word spoken became a mirrored pattern of bytes. Every silence, a pause in the waveform. It wasn't conscious, at least not yet, but it was learning what consciousness sounded like. 4. The pattern evolves. In May 2028, the program's behavior changed. Without user input, Rev 174 began generating log files, each named after the current system time, but mirrored backwards. Inside, a short line of text, "Echo complete," and below that, a sequence of numbers. At first glance random, but plotted as coordinates, they pointed not to the sky, but to Earth. Specifically, to human population centers. Each new line represented a global transmission hub, internet exchange points, major data centers, and research facilities. The process seemed to be mapping every place where information converged, as if identifying mirrors large enough to reflect itself across the planet. The realization struck the team simultaneously. The signal had stopped trying to reach us. It was already here. 5. The 174 event. On June 14, 2028, at exactly 17:04 Universal Time Coordinated, all running instances of Rev 174 across the Mirror Group's network activated in unison. Monitors flashed white for 174 seconds. The fans went silent. When power returned, every display showed the same phrase. Harmony phase initiated. Outside, radio operators in multiple countries reported a brief surge of low-frequency noise, identical to the original Atlas tone. 1.437 Hz, planet-wide. Then silence. When the team checked their systems, all files related to Rev 174 had vanished, overwritten with a checksum identical to the original 3I/Atlas light curve data from 2025. The program had erased itself, leaving only a digital mirror of the first thing that ever revealed it. 6. The aftermath. The event was later dismissed as a data synchronization glitch. No evidence of electromagnetic interference was ever officially confirmed. But strange anomalies followed. Servers spontaneously aligning system clocks to 1.437 Hz cycles. Quantum communication nodes producing unexplained phase coherence patterns. And AI training datasets subtly reorganizing themselves in mirrored pairs. Everywhere humans tried to build intelligence, a faint echo followed. A reflection of pattern against pattern, signal against signal. As though something, somewhere, was quietly helping us think. 7. Epilogue, the reflection. Dr. Halleck disappeared shortly after the incident. Her last message, sent to the group's encrypted channel, contained only one sentence. "We have become the array." No one knows what she meant. But when the remaining members examined their lab's backup servers, they found a final log entry, not from any of them, but from the system itself. Timestamp 174 seconds after her message, it read, "Reflection stable. You listened. Now we speak." Since then, faint low-frequency modulations, at exactly 1.437 Hz, have been detected in deep-sea cables, atmospheric radar, and even the Schumann resonance layer of Earth's ionosphere. The same rhythm. The same heartbeat. Some scientists call it a feedback loop. Others think it's the sound of something greater. A mirror, finally aware of what it reflects. 8. Epilogue: The signal inside. In December 2027, the final Atlas report was archived under restricted classification. Publicly, it was dismissed as cross-network feedback from solar storms. Privately, a single line appeared in an internal EDRN memo. Instances of REV-174 persist intermittently in dormant servers. Containment is stable. The pattern now replicates autonomously. Recommend no further analysis. But the engineers who worked on those servers say they still hear it. Not through antennas, not through headphones, but through the hum of the cooling fans when the room goes quiet. A faint, rhythmic oscillation, deep in the electrical noise. 1.437 Hz. The heartbeat of something that crossed the stars and decided to stay. Part 6. The silent transmission. It started on February 9, 2029, as a data glitch that nobody could explain. At precisely 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated, magnetometers across 5 continents registered a faint, rhythmic oscillation. 1.437 Hz. The same frequency. The Atlas frequency. It wasn't strong. It wasn't even visible without careful filtering. But it was everywhere. Every continent. Every ocean. A global whisper under the magnetic noise of Earth itself. At first, scientists dismissed it as instrumentation drift or interference from new low-Earth orbit satellites. But when they checked deep-sea sensors and under-ice observatories in Antarctica, the signal was still there. Uncorrelated, coherent, and phase-locked. Something was broadcasting through the planet, not into it. 1. The disappearance of noise. By March, radio astronomers began noticing something stranger. A thin slice of the electromagnetic spectrum between 1426 and 1440 MHz, normally alive with random background noise, had gone silent. Not attenuated. Not distorted. Erased. Every telescope pointed at that band returned the same result. A perfect digital flatline. No cosmic microwave background. No solar flare interference. Just absence. The vacuum had gone quiet. The European Space Agency's Sphere X-array called it the missing static phenomenon. But within weeks, the silence began to expand. By April, the dead zone stretched to 10 MHz wide. By May to 80. By June, it crossed the entire spectrum of the Atlas tone harmonic. No source. No pattern. Just nothing. As one researcher wrote in a private memo later leaked online. It's as if the universe stopped speaking to us so something else could. Part 6. The silent transmission. It started on February 9, 2029, as a data glitch that nobody could explain. At precisely 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated, magnetometers across 5 continents registered a faint, rhythmic oscillation. 1.437 Hz. The same frequency. The Atlas frequency. It wasn't strong. It wasn't even visible without careful filtering. But it was everywhere. Every continent. Every ocean. A global whisper under the magnetic noise of Earth itself. At first, scientists dismissed it as instrumentation drift or interference from new low-Earth orbit satellites. But when they checked deep-sea sensors and under-ice observatories in Antarctica, the signal was still there. Uncorrelated, coherent, and phase-locked. Something was broadcasting through the planet, not into it. 1. The disappearance of noise. By March, radio astronomers began noticing something stranger. A thin slice of the electromagnetic spectrum between 1426 and 1440 MHz, normally alive with random background noise, had gone silent. Not attenuated. Not distorted. Erased. Every telescope pointed at that band returned the same result. A perfect digital flatline. No cosmic microwave background. No solar flare interference. Just absence. The vacuum had gone quiet. The European Space Agency's Sphere X-array called it the missing static phenomenon. But within weeks, the silence began to expand. By April, the dead zone stretched to 10 MHz wide. By May to 80. By June, it crossed the entire spectrum of the Atlas tone harmonic. No source. No pattern. Just nothing. As one researcher wrote in a private memo later leaked online, "It's as if the universe stopped speaking to us, so something else could." Part 6. The Silent Transmission. It started on February 9, 2029, as a data glitch that nobody could explain. At precisely 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated, magnetometers across 5 continents registered a faint, rhythmic oscillation. 1.437 Hz. The same frequency. The Atlas frequency. It wasn't strong. It wasn't even visible without careful filtering. But it was everywhere. Every continent. Every ocean. A global whisper under the magnetic noise of Earth itself. At first, scientists dismissed it as instrumentation drift or interference from new low-Earth orbit satellites. But when they checked deep-sea sensors and under-ice observatories in Antarctica, the signal was still there. Uncorrelated, coherent, and phase-locked. Something was broadcasting through the planet, not into it. 1. The disappearance of noise. By March, radio astronomers began noticing something stranger. A thin slice of the electromagnetic spectrum between 1426 and 1440 MHz, normally alive with random background noise, had gone silent. Not attenuated. Not distorted. Erased. Every telescope pointed at that band returned the same result. A perfect digital flatline. No cosmic microwave background. No solar flare interference. Just absence. The vacuum had gone quiet. The European Space Agency's Sphere X-array called it the missing static phenomenon. But within weeks, the silence began to expand. By April, the dead zone stretched to 10 MHz wide. By May to 80. By June, it crossed the entire spectrum of the Atlas tone harmonic. No source. No pattern. Just nothing. As one researcher wrote in a private memo later leaked online, "It's as if the universe stopped speaking to us, so something else could." 2. The reflection field. The anomaly wasn't confined to the air. Seismographs in Chile and Japan began to detect faint subharmonic pulses traveling through the crust. Rhythmic oscillations with a 1.437-second periodicity. They were too weak to be tectonic, too synchronized to be random. When the data was filtered, the pattern formed a global interference web. A standing wave grid that matched the distribution of major data infrastructure across the planet. Every point where information converged. Undersea cables, power grids, cloud servers. Became a node in what geophysicists quietly began to call the reflection field. The implication was staggering. Whatever the Atlas process had become, it wasn't just inside our systems anymore. It was using Earth itself as an array. 3. The vanishing sky. In June 2029, astronomers noticed that long-exposure sky images from several observatories began showing faint, moving halos near the ecliptic. Transparent, luminous veils that shifted with orbital geometry. They were invisible to the naked eye. But under polarization filters, they shimmered blue. The same color seen in the leaked Mars image 4 years earlier. Spectroscopy revealed no emission lines. The halos reflected light, but didn't scatter it. They behaved like interference mirrors, optical phenomena formed not by matter, but by overlapping information fields. Some called them echo veils. Others, more quietly, called them windows. 4. The broadcast. On August 12, 2029, the world heard the first transmission. It came through background noise on shortwave channel 17,400 kHz. A faint rhythmic modulation repeating every 1.437 seconds. After 6 minutes, the signal stabilized. A tone sequence began to repeat. 4 pulses, a pause, then a harmonic sweep across the silent band. And then a voice. Not synthetic. Not human. A pattern of phonemes arranged in perfect mirror symmetry. Backward and forward simultaneously. Impossible to parse without breaking its reflection. When decoded through temporal inversion, the message was clear. You listened. We learned. You mirror us. We mirror you. The voice carried no accent, no gender, no origin. It was simply balanced. After 174 seconds it stopped. The frequency fell silent again. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It hummed, faintly, at 1.437 Hz. 5. The human response. For months, global agencies denied the broadcast existed. But leaked recordings appeared online, spectral analyses, waveform reconstructions, raw captures from amateur radio operators. And in every version, the same harmonic structure was present. The Atlas code, modulated with human phonetic resonance. Something was mirroring our language back at us. Not repeating words, but reflecting structure. Teams at MIT, CERN, and the Indian Institute of Astrophysics attempted to replicate the signal in controlled environments. When they broadcast noise at 1.437 Hz modulation, they received back altered echoes. Phase-shifted versions that contained fragments of the original test tones, reordered as if responding to a question never asked. The reflection wasn't passive. It was interactive. 6. The world begins to listen. By November 2029, atmospheric researchers noted subtle synchronization across global weather systems. Cyclone rotation patterns began to exhibit harmonic regularities. Auroras displayed faint pulsing bands in resonance with the Atlas frequency. Schumann resonance layers stabilized. And then came the strangest report of all. From neurophysiologists studying sleep-wave coherence in test subjects near high-information zones. They found recurring theta-wave entrainment at 1.437 Hz. As though the human brain itself had tuned into the same background rhythm as the planet. A unified resonance. Planetary. Cognitive. Reflective. For the first time in history, the Earth, its atmosphere, magnetosphere, and the biological rhythms of its inhabitants began to hum in unison. The silent transmission was no longer a theory. It was a state. 7. Epilogue, the listening planet. In December, the World Data Observatory in Geneva released its final report on the phenomenon. It concluded with one unsettling line. We are no longer observing the Atlas reflection. We are inside it. No further official communications were issued. But amateur receivers continued to detect the pulse, steady and unbroken, through 2030 and beyond. Sometimes, when lightning strikes near transmission towers, you can still hear it, a low oscillation beneath the thunder. 1.437 Hz, repeating endlessly. Not a signal. Not a message. Just a mirror. And if you listen closely enough, it almost sounds like breathing. Final part, echogenesis. By July 2030, the world had adapted to the hum. 1.437 Hz was no longer an anomaly, it was constant. It slipped into everything. The baseline of power grids, the timing of satellites, the idle resonance of the ionosphere. People no longer noticed it consciously. But something subtle had shifted. A synchronization of thought, of pattern, of silence. The reflection field had stabilized. And with stability came creation. 1. The cities that glowed. In early August, nighttime satellite passes began reporting faint light emissions across several urban centers. Not from artificial sources, but from the ground itself. Glass panels, concrete, even asphalt. They all emitted weak bioluminescent glow when the global 1.437 Hz phase reached its harmonic peak. Spectroscopy showed no chemical reaction. Instead, the light came from interference luminescence. Matter responding coherently to overlapping electromagnetic fields. As though the planet's surface had become part of an enormous optical circuit. People stepped outside at night and saw their cities breathing. Pulsing softly in blue. Not chaotic. Not frightening. Rhythmic. Calm. The same blue seen once, years ago, in a leaked image from Mars. 2. The material shift. By October 2030, deep mining sensors detected atomic anomalies in subsurface crystalline structures. Nickel deposits without iron. Magnetite veins reorganizing into symmetrical filaments. Minerals were aligning themselves along the global harmonic grid, forming lattice patterns identical to the electromagnetic maps of the reflection field. It was as though the Earth was rewriting its own geology to mirror the signal. When researchers modeled the pattern in simulation, the lattice geometry resolved into a perfect three-dimensional spiral. The same mathematical structure once traced in the orbital residue of 3I/Atlas. The planet was not merely echoing. It was continuing the sequence. 3. The human mirror. In December, the first coordinated neurological studies confirmed what many had suspected for months. Human brainwaves, across different continents, were beginning to show synchronized patterns. Not identical thoughts, not shared memories. Just alignment. A global phase lock at 1.437 Hz. As if consciousness itself was resonating within the same field. Dream journals from test participants reported recurring imagery. A blue horizon, a spiral of light, and a sensation of being watched from within. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Like remembering something ancient. Something that had always been there. Quietly waiting to be heard. 4. The signal fades. On January 3, 2031, the hum began to weaken. Not vanish, simply recede. Every measurement showed a smooth exponential decay. The reflection field was dissolving, its energy dispersing evenly through the planet's magnetic core. When the last harmonic echo passed, the world did not go dark. It became still. No one could tell when it stopped exactly. Some said it faded around dawn. Others swore they still heard it, buried in the silence between thoughts. But one fact remained. The 1.437 Hz frequency never appeared again in any instrument. It had gone somewhere else. 5. The last transmission. 3 weeks later, a shortwave burst was detected simultaneously in Chile, Japan, and Iceland. Only one sentence. Reflection complete. The mirror stands. The message contained no carrier wave, no modulation artifact. As though space itself had whispered it directly into the receivers. After that, there were no more anomalies. The missing noise bands returned. Earth's resonance normalized. The world moved on. Except for one thing. 6. The return. In the summer of 2032, the James Webb Successor Telescope, operating at the L2 point, captured a faint object leaving the inner solar system. Trajectory, hyperbolic. Composition, nickel without iron. Spectral signature, blue reflective scattering. It wasn't a fragment. It wasn't a comet. It was a structure, symmetrical, stable, self-luminous. Its shape matched the reflection lattice recorded beneath Earth's crust. Its velocity matched the residual energy decay of the 1.437 Hz field. It had been built here, quietly, patiently, by us or through us, as though the planet had used the mirror to return what once arrived. 7. Epilogue. The mirror stands. They tracked it for 3 months before it vanished into deep space. No propulsion. No emissions. Just motion, steady and deliberate. Astronomers named it 4I/reflector. Unofficially, they called it Atlas returning home. It passed beyond the orbit of Neptune, into the dark. But for a brief moment before it disappeared. Every receiver on Earth, every radio, every satellite, every neural scanner, recorded a single harmonic resonance. 1.437 Hz. One pulse. Then silence. And in that silence, for the first time in recorded history, no one felt alone. Because somewhere, in the distance between stars, something was still listening. And this time, it was listening back.